Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
And according to my passive-aggressive watch, we are now live on the air. It's telling me to watch the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. You should be too, but then again, if you heard me say that, you already are. So, hey, welcome to Trinity Talk Live. This is the show where we get on every Monday at noon, and Ben and I talk about stuff. It can be just about anything, but it's stuff.
Could be things.
It could be things. It could sometimes be things, or items, or topics. Yeah. Really, it's a wide variety on this program, but always from a Christian perspective. So it's not always necessarily news items. Last week we talked about Star Wars. May the 4th have been with you. A week ago. So anyway, but it's basically whatever people would normally be talking about around a water cooler if we were all going to work, but talking about it from a Christian perspective, because what you see out there in the world on the various news media is not always taking that into account about how Christians should be thinking about and responding to these things that are going on in the world. So that's what we're going to do. And hey, what you're going to do while you're watching the show, if you're watching us live, is you are going to comment in the live chat, right? Exactly. This is our participatory process where we want you to be involved, agree with us, disagree with us, whatever your thoughts may be, share your thoughts, share them in the live chat, and then my lovely wife, who is our producer back behind all the wonderful technical equipment, Mary Kay, will let us know what your comments are. She's getting up right now. That's worrying me that we're having technical difficulties. She's walking around. Oh no, good. She's just getting our little signs to let us know when we've been talking too long, like right now. Anyway, so she will let us know what your comments are, and then we can actually answer any questions or respond to any comments right here live on the air. So we'd love to have you be part of the conversation, so please feel free to join in. Hey, as long as you're doing that, do me another favor. Can you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already done it? And also share this video, share the YouTube channel with your friends. Last I checked, we're just under 750 subscribers. We are really hoping to get to 1,000. Obviously, not that we want to stop there necessarily, but for those of you that are familiar with the way YouTube works, there are certain capabilities that it opens up on your channel when you get to 1,000 subscribers. Things like being able to live stream from a mobile device, which is something that we really want to do in order to, once all these restrictions are lifted, to be able to get out into the world live and maybe pray for people, find out what the needs are and what people's needs are out there. But we can't do that unless we get to 1,000 subscribers. So we're asking you to please help us out with that. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already done it. Share it on any social media you have. And the best way to get people talking about the YouTube channel is to talk to them yourselves about it. I've seen a lot of people, and I'm really grateful for anything people do, but where they'll literally just share the link to the channel on their social media. But if you wouldn't mind, if you're going to do that, also type in a comment yourself. But hey, this is a great Christian YouTube channel from my church or that I watch or whatever. You guys really should check it out. Or actually, send it in private messages to people, recommending it that way. A personal connection is obviously more effective than an impersonal one. So as best you can do that, we very much appreciate it. Hey, did I cover everything in my rapid fire intro, or is there anything I missed?
Sounds good. And and free PR is always nice too.
Exactly.
So we appreciate all of your help with that. But no, seriously, we really are trying to get to that 1,000 subscriber milestone. So if you could help us out, great. And continue to watch, like, comment, subscribe, all of those good things.
Awesome. All right, let's get started. We got 5 stories we want to go through today. If we have time, we might not, but we're going to do the best we can. Starting out with story number 1, which is kind of I don't know if personal is the right word for me, but for those of you that follow Ravi Zacharias, Ravi Zacharias is the president and founder of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, and the international wing was called the Ravi Zacharias International Trust. I'm not sure if it's still called that. They might have changed the name. But he is a Christian speaker, theologian, and apologist he's an itinerant preacher. I mean, he's made his life out of traveling from place to place around the world and speaking about the Christian faith, defending the Christian faith. Kind of a philosophical approach. Different apologists have different points of emphases. Ravi Zacharias was very philosophical, very much into the moral argument and talking about how morality shows God and things like that. He was profoundly influential on me. For those of you that don't know, I've been a Christian apologist for over 2 decades now, and in my early going, especially, I could list off a few apologists that were probably most influential in getting me really strongly more into the discipline and influencing the direction I was going to take, and Ravi Zacharias was one of them. Norman Geisler was another one, and Norman Geisler just passed away recently. Ravi Zacharias, for those who didn't know, he's been struggling with cancer. He had a cancer diagnosis. He actually was able to, he lives in Georgia, but right before all the travel restrictions went in, he actually did manage to get in to see a specialist in Texas. And he seemed relatively optimistic. That was a few months ago. But then recently, they just announced earlier this week that, or last week I should say, some not so hopeful news. He has cancer in a tumor in his sacrum. That actually has been responding to the chemotherapy treatment, but it's metastasized, and the areas where it has spread to apparently are not responding well. And it's actually worsened, and his oncologist has told him that it's gotten to the point where there's nothing else they can do. So they're at the point now where the family's gathering to kind of spend as much time with him as he has left. So did you listen to Ravi Zacharias at all?
Oh, yeah, and he's been very influential in me as well. Now, for those who know me, I have been alive for a little more than 20 years.
Thanks. I love you too, Ben.
Love you too, Ken. But no, even in my ministry, he's been very influential. He just his preaching style and his approach to things that kind of caters to my wheelhouse as well. I think we're kind of similar on that same page a little bit. But no, he's been very influential for me as well. So this news comes as saddening, but also I thought the letter that his family wrote, or whoever wrote it and posted on the website, was very well thought out and very heartfelt and genuine, and just beautiful. And I loved how they put in there what you would expect from a Christian, or especially from a ministry like Ravi's, that they are saddened, but they are grateful for whatever time the Lord gives them that they have left with him, and they know that he will be in paradise, and so they look forward to that. And so that's our hope as well.
I always wondered about that. We always talk about that. Whatever time we have left with him, we use that phraseology a lot. But especially in the case with his family, that seems to. I mean, a lot of them work for the ministry. That you would certainly hope that they're all believers as well. And so it's really just a blip on the radar screen. It's a temporary separation. But if we really think about it, the amount of time that they're going to have left with him is eternity.
Eternity, exactly.
Is eternity, and so that's the hope that Christianity gives. I'll tell you, it's one I was talking to my wife. Is one of my life goals. I always wanted to get to see him in person. I've never actually gotten to see him in person, and we had he was here a couple years ago down in D.C., and I can't remember what it was. We had some event going on the same weekend, so I couldn't make that. And then I was kicking myself. I did feel so bad in retrospect, but I was watching his channel, and a video popped up on his channel. This was sometime late last year, if I recall, maybe even early this year, but I think it was late. It was in the fall, I think. And I saw, it just said Ravi Zacharias at the University of Delaware. Mm-hmm. Those of you that are maybe from out of town might realize, your University of Delaware is like 30 minutes up the road from us. It's my alma mater. It's where my wife and I met. We went to school, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And it was like 2 nights before the video post. It's like I just missed it, and I wasn't paying attention. I didn't realize he was going to be in town. Now, afterwards I found out that that seats obviously went to University of Delaware students first. Alumni got no priority whatsoever, and they even had to have like an overflow room, and I don't think even anybody gotten that. So it's like the odds are I probably wouldn't have been able to get in to see him anyway, but it was one of those things. So you know what? Hopefully I'll get to sit down and have a chat with him in eternity. What do you say?
Absolutely. That'd be great. And of course, our prayers go out to his family, who will definitely, even though we have that hope, it's still a grieving process, and they're in the middle of that pre-grief right now. Anybody who's walked through a terminal prognosis like that, you start to develop some pre-grief. And so our heart definitely goes out to his family, who are spending as much time with him now, but also they're starting to grieve. And so, and the rest of us grieve as well. At least, but not as those who have no hope, as the Apostle Paul would say.
Yeah, and I think, and I apologize, I didn't write this down. I should have brought this with me. I believe, it's either on their website or maybe their Facebook page. They did set up something where people can actually share their gratitude and thanks for Ravi. And so if that's something you're interested in doing, I said check out the rzm.org is their website. See if it's on there. I'm not entirely sure, but I did remember reading, because needless to say, I belong to a lot of Christian apologetics groups on Facebook, and a lot of them have been sharing the stories everywhere. And I remember seeing somebody share that, and again, I just didn't have time to click on the link at that time, so I got to go back and look for it. But I think there is an opportunity to kind of tell him what he's meant to you, if you want to.
That's pretty cool.
All right, story number 2.
Sure thing.
All right, story number 2 is one that's been all over the place, and it's the story of Ahmaud Arbery. For those of you that haven't been following along, this is a case out of Georgia where there was I want to say he just would have turned 26, I believe. Yeah, it would have been his 26th birthday recently, yeah. So he was 25 at the time. Ahmaud Arbery was running through a Georgia neighborhood, and there was a video of what happened that kind of went viral. And it was 2 gentlemen, Gregory McMichael, age 64, and Travis McMichael, age 34, told police that they pursued Arbery, and they had another person recording them on video after spotting him running in their neighborhood. The 2 of them said they thought that Arbery matched the appearance of a burglary suspect who they said had been recorded on a surveillance camera sometime before. The video, again, it has some graphic content. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but suffice it to say, it shows the 2 men, one standing in the bed of the pickup truck, one I believe standing next to it, both armed, one with a shotgun, and it does show Arbery running along the side, kind of going past them, running, and it's described as in this article and others at a jogger's pace, so he's not like sprinting. But he's running past it, and then there's out of sight for a while. The next time you see, he's in a struggle with the gentleman with the shotgun. Shots have been fired, and Arbery ends up getting shot and killed. It's my understanding from something else that I read that earlier, and I don't know if this was caught on video or not, that earlier he was running, and the gentleman in the truck, the people in the truck, had kind of tried to cut him off, and he turned around and ran another direction, but then they drove around and they got in front of him. So needless to say, the story is apparently Georgia does have citizens arrest laws, and one of these gentlemen was a former, I believe, police officer, and they claimed that Arbery, as I said, met the description they thought of a burglary suspect, and so they went out to try to stop him as citizens. Needless to say, that after several months went by, no charges were filed. There were a lot of cries of racial injustice. That the suggestion being that these gentlemen, why did they think he fit the description of the burglary suspect? Well, because he was African American, I guess, is the implication, and then there's been some response from pastors in the Christian community, especially obviously from the African American Christian community, encouraging people to speak up and against racial injustice. And I'll save the rest for commentary, I guess, at this point. That's the nuts and bolts of the story. Ben, your thoughts, go.
It's sad anytime that a life is taken, and so it's definitely, we don't take this story lightly. And I don't know if you got a chance, Ken, or if you even wanted to watch the video. I did get a chance to. It's hard. There's actually another video, a surveillance video of the supposed burglary that took place. I don't know if you saw that one too.
I read about another one. I didn't get to watch it. Where they say, I don't know if it's the same you're talking about someone entering a construction.
Yeah, that's the same one.
All right. Now, was that, my understanding is that was sometime before, correct me if I'm wrong, that was not like the night this happened. That was like a week or so or a couple weeks before. I'm not sure.
Well, as my understanding, it was the same day, and actually it was in the afternoon. I think it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon that this whole event took place. And so the security camera footage shows somebody entering a construction site, fitting the description of an African-American male wearing a white T-shirt. Also, Mr. Arbery was wearing a white T-shirt, so fitting that description a little bit. But I'll say my thoughts on it, and I think actually I'll weigh in with a lot of the Christian leadership that's commenting on it. Now, of course, in the African-American community, you've got people like Al Sharpton and Priscilla Schreier saying, we need to keep this in front of us, crying out for justice. But even people that are also sympathetic that aren't African American, like J.D. Greer, also saying, like, yeah, this is a clear case. The more I looked into it, and I haven't gone too deep into it, but the more I looked into it, I don't know that the specifics are clear, but it does seem to me excessive from the first video that lethal force was not warranted. The fact that he clearly is unarmed. And they're shouting some things, but you can't really make out what's being shouted, and the altercation. Anyway, there's a lot that goes into it, and I'll just warn you if you want to look at the video. It is graphic, so just prepare yourself for that. But yeah, my heart goes out to specifically the family of Ahmaud. And there's other questions surrounding this, because why this happened in February, why did it take several months for any kind of arrest or investigation to even occur? That raises a lot of questions. Specifically, it said it raises questions on the wisdom of citizens' arrests, and so we can get into all that if you want to. They were within their rights for Georgia's open carry law, but some of the testimony does not line up with what you see in the footage, as far as they said they pulled up next to him and tried to get him to pull over. Well, clearly in the beginning of this footage, at least, now maybe that happened prior to this, but at least in the beginning of this footage, he was at a jogger's pace, jogging up to this vehicle that was already parked. So there's a lot of discrepancies that I would take issue with on that. None of it takes away from the fact that a man's life was lost, and that's what I think demands justice. And you would hope that in our legal system, which is flawed, I'll say that,
I've said it before on the show.
Yeah, and no human justice system is going to be perfect, but you would hope at least the same standard for justice would be applied no matter the race. And so to see it automatically become a racial issue, I understand.
Well, and I guess that's where I struggle with this is they say he met the description of the burglary suspect. From what you're saying is African-American male wearing a white T-shirt.
Right.
Is that really I mean, I've read several stories about it, and that's been the questions that are running through my mind. It's like you're trying to say he met the description. How exactly did he meet the description?
Right.
And I can't imagine that whatever description they're referring to includes the white T-shirt, unless he's like the white T-shirt burglar that's always wearing the same clothes every time he breaks into someplace,
Right.
And so it's like that bothered me. It's like, why you can't just say meets the description, because I, as a lawyer, my lawyer background, my first cross-examination question would be, give me more information. What did you mean by that? As to quote Greg Kokel. What do you mean he met the description? Because it certainly seems to me the only thing I've seen that meets the description is that he was an African-American male, and that's a problem.
Profiling, yeah.
Yeah, that's profiling, absolutely. And so I get to, and we talked last week about, the obligation to use whatever my small platform you have to speak up, and maybe by now, hey, if you've been listening and subscribed, maybe we are up to 750 subsubscribers. I don't know. But, we don't have a huge platform. My wife's looking very depressed. Like, no, we don't. Anyway, but you use what platform you have, because I'm glad to hear that you were doing some research into some other pastors out there that aren't African-American that are speaking out against this, because it seems like, and look, I am not one, just so people know, there have been other instances that people claim were racially motivated that I haven't been convinced by. But here's one that it certainly looks that way, at least to me. And I think that we, as Christians, need to, no matter what race we're from, what the color of our skin, we need to be speaking up about things like this and say, no, this wasn't okay. And this is a gentleman who, here's what I get to, even if he was the burglary suspect, all right, even if he was.
It seems like an unwarranted use of force.
Yeah.
Because he was not armed, didn't have anything on his person, according to the report,
and
had nothing on his
citizens.
person.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
At that point you let him go.
Yeah.
You let him go. Because so that it's kind of got two problems for me. Is one, I'm not convinced by the, fitting the description thing. That seems to carry some racial questions for me. And two, what happened afterwards is clearly was unarmed. There was, you don't resort to that level. It's not your obligation. It's not your responsibility. Leave it to the police officers if need be. I also read somewhere in one of these articles I was reading that, and again, just goes back to the overall big picture, that there were some 911 recordings from that night. And one of the initial calls from I don't know if it was Gregory or Travis, the 911 operator. What they just said was, here it is right here. Yeah, there's a black male running down the street.
That's the only description they give.
And the dispatcher, to his or her credit, actually says, "I just need to know what he was doing wrong." And so it sounds like the dispatcher's trying to get a grip on, why are you calling me about a black male running down the street?
Right.
You know, what's he doing wrong? And so that's another one that just raised a lot of questions for me. So my prayers and sympathy go out to the Arbery family. Yes, I'm a firm believer in, the justice system needs to get all the evidence in, and is it possible there's something here that we don't know about? Sure, I guess it's possible, but what we've seen so far, this looks like a very tragic and most likely racially motivated situation that we as a Christian community need to stand up in opposition to. So, all right. So we will move on. Oh yeah, I've told you I was going to let you cover this next. Next one's the Facebook one.
Oh, sure.
Facebook's court. So you can try to describe this story. Go for it.
All right. Let me pull it up here real quick. So this is from the New York Post, and apparently Facebook, the corporation, has, well, they're calling it their new Supreme Court. I don't think that's the official term for it. But it says Facebook's new Supreme Court looks like a license to censor. We brought up before on this show, platforms like Facebook, or social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube, have openly declared they're taking down posts that are deemed as harmful misinformation. And so Facebook has put together this oversight board. That's the official title. The Facebook Oversight Board is a 20-member independent panel.
That's better than the Facebook Censorship Board, don't you think?
At least more politically correct than the Facebook Censorship Board. Whether in practice, well, we'll find out. But it's a 20-member independent panel that will rule on which posts can be blocked as false or as hate speech or as harassment. And now this article is a little bit slanted one way or another, so trying to do it from an unbiased perspective may prove challenging. But it raises some questions about those specific members on the panel, members who tend to lean more toward the left, politically speaking, and that harbors these feelings that the censorship, because that's what it is, let's face it, is going to be, well, anytime you have humans censoring things, it's going to be biased. Mm-hmm. And so this article is raising the question of how unbiased, and is it basically a breeding ground for leftist, that's what they call it. I'm just quoting the article here, censorship. And so you've got people like Michael McConnell, Alan Roosberger, he was famous from the UK paper, the Guardian, that posted Edward Snowden's findings, but he tends to be more. All of these people tend to be more left-leaning, and it goes into further detail about social justice issues. Tend to be, when you have that pool of social justice, which is a kind of muddy term anyway, tend to be more left-leaning. Anyway, there's questions there. It's basically outsourcing so that Mark Zuckerberg in particular doesn't get all of the backlash from deleting specific posts. It's outsourcing the censorship to a panel of 20 people, so it can't fall on one specific person, which makes sense from a from a
business standpoint.
Business standpoint is what I meant. Makes sense from a business standpoint. There's questions, well, at the foundation of censorship there to begin with. So,
well, it gets into what we were talking a little bit about last week. Is there's two separate questions here as far as whether or not can they legally do this? Yeah, I mean, probably, potentially. Although there's some debate about that, and I will say that, because is Facebook what's called a public accommodation, and that opens up some other doors as far as whether or not how much they can censor or not, but. They have at least an argument, shall we say, that they are allowed, it's their platform, they're allowed to let on it who they want and not who they don't want. Like I said, a public accommodation, for those that don't know, let's say that I run a movie theater, all right, and my movie theater is open to all comers, all right. Well, then if I open up something that's open to all comers, then I can't say, I'm advertising, in other words, to the general community. I can't say, except, only people from a certain religious background aren't allowed to come in. People from a certain racial background aren't allowed to come in. Well, that's a whole other issue. But you're a public accommodation. You're open for the public. Whereas, a church organization like for a church that is for specifically the Christian community can say things like, in order to serve on our, whatever your governing board is based on your denominational preference, you have to have certain beliefs in order to do that, because that's a different scenario. So if Facebook is in fact a public accommodation like that, then possibly there's an argument that there are limits on what they can censor and what they can't censor, so to speak. But leaving that aside, even for the moment, what I found interesting about the story, right now, supposedly it's just going to start out where they're just going to be reviewing appeals of decisions that Facebook themselves have made. But eventually the idea is this panel itself is going to have the authority to actually censor and remove posts. You said it was 20 people? Is that what it was?
Yeah, according to the article, it's 20 people.
I've got to think this is going to expand, because there's no way 20 people are reviewing a whole bunch of Facebook posts with the number of posts that go on there.
It'd be impossible.
It's impossible. And so I've got to think that this is like going to be a whole new corporation that's called the Facebook Censorship Board that's just going to, I'm sorry, going to keep saying that. But here's why this story particularly spoke to me, and I hadn't talked to you about this yet. I know we've talked about my friends from Indianapolis, Keith and Lori Trump, that are, pastors out there at Keith, if you're watching this, you're going to get Living Truth Church, I believe it is, in Carmel, Indiana. I want to say I'm going to give a shout out. I thought the word was new was in there somewhere, and now I'm getting confused. But was it New Living Truth? Or was it New Carmel? I don't know. But I think it's like Living Truth Church. He's actually joining us this Friday. He's going to be delivering not joining us, he's going to be zooming in from Indiana. But he's going to be delivering the message during our Friday night worship concert this week. But for those of you, see if people can piece this together, again, his name is Keith Trump. And he is supposed to be having an evangelistic event here just outside of Washington, D.C. in July, hoping that enough restrictions get lifted. He's able to do that, obviously, but he's gotten a position where he's had to start promoting it. And he has started promoting, I think his ministry is called Trump of God Ministries, if I remember correctly. And he was posting the other day how he was trying to start promoting it and advertising on Facebook, and his posts keep getting taken down, being called, this is political speech, we're not allowing this or something like that, which didn't know they didn't allow political speech to begin with, but they, Facebook is, whatever their algorithm or whatever is seeing Trump gathering outside DC, and they've been taking it down automatically. So now some of that may be, again, just because they have these automatic algorithms, and so having a human being actually look at these things and make intelligent decisions isn't necessarily a bad thing. The question, I guess, arises: are we going to be doing this in an unbiased manner, both from a political and religious perspective and other perspectives, to allow all to discuss? This is what we talked about last week, that I just feel like the marketplace of ideas is enhanced by allowing ideas into it, not by trying to limit what's into it. Right. And Facebook's a prime example for that. My wife looks like she wants to say something.
Yes, it is Trump of God Ministries. It is Living Truth Church, and it is Carmel, Indiana.
So the word new is not in there anywhere, is what you're saying?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Well, it raises, actually, even at the bottom of this article, it says, at the Post, we know that Facebook makes mistakes. It took us weeks to get the company to reverse its blockage of Stephen Mosher's opinion column suggesting the coronavirus might have escaped from the Wuhan lab. What's classified as harmful misinformation may in fact be correct information, and it just doesn't fit the mainstream narrative.
And I guess that's what I get to, even if it turns out not to be correct information. I mean, the way we find out what's correct and what's not correct is by talking it through and looking at it. And when you have things that, are suppressed, that are censored, guess what that's going to do? That's going to make more people think they're true. And so you actually have the opposite effect of what you're trying to accomplish. And that's why I just think the best thing to do is let them in. Let's talk about it. I had a friend the other day, and I'm not going to say who this one was, because this particular individual does lean very strongly one particular political way, and some of the things this person posts are, perfectly reasonable. Other things are not so much. But they posted something, and I don't know if people can't see this or what, but it got censored by Facebook. And so like the picture still shows, but then over the top of it, there's a thing that says, Facebook has decided this is, fake news. That's not what they say, but, I can't remember how they put it. The independent fact checkers have verified that this isn't true or something like that. And people in the comments section actually had to tell this person, hey, did you know this was over your pictures? I don't know if when you post something and Facebook does that, if you even see it, or maybe they just hadn't gotten a chance to see it yet. But it was one of those things where even though I looked at it and I tended to disagree with the statement that this meme was trying to make, there was still an argument to be made there, and it's kind of like, okay, why are we trying to cover this up? And I don't know. I just felt like we let that in, we talk about it, we get it out there. So
yeah, I wonder how one becomes an independent fact checker to begin with. What credentials do these independent fact checkers have?
Well, I'm not. You're a fact checker. I'm a fact checker. We're not the same person. Therefore, we're independent from each other. We are independent fact checkers. Yeah. There we go. So, but that's look, and I'm aware of the fact that we all have biases. Every single person has a bias. I've openly acknowledged sometimes on this show, sometimes when it's been relevant to the topic we've been talking about perspective I come from. We were talking about live streaming church services and whether churches should gather. I said, look, I will openly admit we're from a church that obviously has certain blessings in that regard that other churches may not have. And so you kind of openly acknowledge your biases, but there's bias with a lowercase b and bias with a capital B, I guess. And even though we all acknowledge that we all have biases, I think what we need to do is, when you're doing something like this, you really need to make an effort to try to balance the biases.
Right. Absolutely.
See, I like that slogan, balance the biases. Maybe I can run for political
I
office.
was just going to say that could be your...
Vote for Ken. He'll balance the biases. So, no, I'm not running for political
unbiasedly.
All right, anything else on that one?
No, I think we can move on.
All right, we're going to move on.
Before we get taken down.
It's Facebook. Well, our link's on Facebook. YouTube might do the same thing to us. All right, so the next story we're going to talk about is one from Christian counselor Eliza. I hope I'm not mispronouncing this. I think it's Huey. It's Huie. And she's written an article here about quarantine psychological toll, 3 disorders to watch out for. And I think this is it's really a neat article because it talks about 3 things that we might not be thinking of, types of psychological issues that people may be having during the course of this quarantine, how to recognize them, and specifically what the church could do to try to help. All right. And so obviously we're not going to have time to go through the whole article or anything here, but it's on churchleaders.com. Like I said, the title is Quarantine Psychological Toll, 3 Disorders to Watch Out For. And what she talks about agoraphobia and OCD tendencies. Agoraphobia is the fear of leaving your house, and OCD is the hyper-focus anxiety or fear about something that drives a needed action. And she's talking about how we're all talking, a lot of people are saying, I can't wait till this is over, I want to get out. And the understanding that not everybody's feeling that way. And when these restrictions do get lifted, that's going to be a point of major stress for some people that we need to be aware of. I know that, I won't go into that publicly. So those of you that know me know that that's one of these diagnoses has personal impact on someone close to me as well. And so that I'm very worried about. And as far as handling the quarantine situation. But then she goes on to, what, for example, in that first one, in the agoraphobia thing, she talks about what can church do to help people that are dealing with this. And one thing she talks about, keep online services, activities, and connection going. Communicate your cleaning strategies, encourage and model safety measures, encourage gradual ways people can re-engage, and speak into the fear of getting sick or being vulnerable. Like that first one, she talks about keep online services, activities, and connection going. I know that's something that I know personally because I'm largely helping figure this out, that we are very much involved with here at Trinity. You can probably tell by these camera angles right now, while this church people aren't meeting here, all our cameras are right in the middle of the center aisle of the sanctuary. They can't be here when people start coming back in.
Yeah.
And so we are working out a plan to try to continue to deliver this type of thing, but in a way that allows some people to come in, but still reaches people that maybe aren't as comfortable or aren't able because there may be a higher health category risk to come in. And the other things it talked about were burnout and trauma, and addiction. So I won't steal all the thunder. I'll field it over to Ben about your thoughts about all this.
I personally loved that the article not only raises the issues to look out for, but she goes into specific things, because a lot of times you read these kind of articles and they raise awareness, but they don't really give concrete examples of how you can address that. And so I thought that was very helpful. A lot of things that we had planned on anyway, in terms of the agoraphobia and OCD, keeping church service running, live stream. That's obviously in the plans for us as Trinity as we continue to reopen. We plan to communicate our cleaning strategies. So a lot of these were kind of common sense, I guess, but we had already talked through them, so at least maybe it seems common sense to us. But again, that's one of those things. We were talking in our small group about people saying, when's it going to be over? When's it going to be over? She starts this article with that phrase, when is this going to be over? And that's the question on a lot of people's minds. And the hope is, at least for churches, is that we would have an influx of people coming into the sanctuary, but that may not be the reality, especially as people, they want to wait it out. So we may not see, once we open the doors for large gatherings, we may not see the number that we had before all of this started. We may not see that even grow until months and months or even years down the line. So how do we continue to remain connected with those? The other things that she went into, like you had mentioned, were burnout and trauma. That's very real. That's one of the ones that I hadn't, again, that's kind of one of those things that makes sense as common sense, but I wasn't really at the forefront of my mind to pay attention to, was a lot of the healthcare workers. They see this on a regular basis. It even mentions pastors. As ministry pastors, we are, and this is talking from a different article, but it talks about we're more than just strangers, like at an NBA or NFL gathering. We are a family, the family of God. We spend time with the people that come into our sanctuary. We marry them, we bury them. We're involved in each other's lives, and so we build these relationships. And so for pastors too, who have to bury these people, that can take a toll and can be stressful when you see all of the impact that it has on the people that you love, not even just immediately, but by extension. That does cause a lot of grief and trauma, and so that's something to be aware of. And so she talks about setting up counseling for those, taking a Sabbath, make sure we are all taking care of ourselves, right? Self-health is something that, yes, we always kind of talked about, but now it's becoming more and more evident that, we do need to take care of ourselves. And the last one she talked about was addiction. She says addiction thrives in secret. The CDC had to release, I don't know if you saw this, they had to release a statement saying that alcohol is not a effective coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. And it's sad that they actually had to release it, because it tells you that people are turning to those things. They're turning to anything that's going to sate that anxiety. And so by having something practical that the church can do is having support groups. We've had Celebrate Recovery here before. That's something definitely to talk about, getting back into the works. As people come out of this quarantine, it's not going to be the same. We keep saying that it's not going to be the same, but I don't think any of us really know exactly how it's not going to be the same. So the more that we can think through these things and have plans in place to be the church, to be loving and supportive of people who need it, and may not even be able to express how they need it. Some people may have developed addictions, or may have developed trauma, or may have developed OCD or agoraphobia, maybe not to some extreme degrees, but to some degree. And so even talking about it may cause people to think themselves, oh, well, yeah, maybe I should think about joining this group or something like that.
I think there's a lesson in there for the church as a whole that hopefully we can take even after this is over, whatever that means. I think too many churches, have fallen into a rut of this is the way we've always done things, and so we want to keep doing things the way we've always done them. And one thing that this whole pandemic has forced us to do is to get past that and to start thinking outside the box. And what you're hinting at is, and what this article is really what I really liked is it's talking about, we're about to launch into this phase of maybe, or phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, what we have here in Maryland. I don't know what other states have, of trying to reopen, and understand this is some things we need to be looking for while we're going through this process. So it's forward thinking.
Yeah.
It's looking ahead. It's not getting comfortable in the position that you're in right now. And right now we are in a pandemic situation where we're forced to think that way. We're forced to think ahead, but understand about what the needs of people may be as we're going through this process, and how we as a church can serve them. Once we're out of whatever the final phase is and we're allowed to gather again, I'd like to encourage all the churches out there to keep that mindset going, because that's life. I mean, it's emphasized right now in the face of a pandemic, but that's life. Things don't stay the same. The world does not stay the same. And we really need to be approaching being the church with a forward-thinking perspective of, what's coming up, what's going to be happening, and how are we going to be in a position to serve? Because if we don't think that way, then we're reactive instead of proactive. And if you wait for something to happen before you think, oh, this is now happening, how now, as we as a church, how can we serve that need? By the time you get everything in place and you're now serving that need has evolved in some way, shape, or form.
The window's kind of closing, and it's always a constantly moving target.
Yeah, and so just church leaders out there, as far as when you're thinking about how to move forward out of all this, maybe just that's the broad mindset that I think we need to have, and then we work down from there into the specifics. So,
and it's a scriptural mindset too. Scripture calls us to do life together, to weep with those who weep, to rejoice with those who rejoice. That's part of what being the church looks like. It's not only looking out to your own needs, but to the needs of others. And part of that, it may be anticipating the needs of others. Anticipating, like you're saying, Ken, is forward thinking outside of yourself and saying, okay, well, if I'm a shut-in, so we have, and that's the other thing I think they drew out in here really nicely, was not to forget about those sick and shut-in members who were doing this way before quarantine. Then going back to social gatherings, not to forget that they're still in this situation. How can we now be more empathetic, now that everybody has kind of walked through this, to be more reaching out to those people, to let them know that they're not alone, I think is important.
So before we move on to the next story, I got to make one comment. Are you a Shakespeare fan at all?
Somewhat.
Because not earlier when you said that we marry them and we bury them, I admit that I zoned out for a little bit afterwards, because whenever I hear that say we marry them, it makes me think of Much Ado About Nothing. This is Shakespeare humor. People, some of you might just be, but that's okay. I'm gonna ask my wife to remind me. Is it Polonius? Is that Hero's uncle's name? No, I don't know who I'm thinking. What's Hero's uncle's name? Do you remember? Father. I'm sorry. Yeah. Anyways, Claudio is supposed to be getting married to Hero, and he thinks she's been unfaithful to him. It's all set up by the bad guy, of course, by Don John. And so Claudio comes. I thought it was Polonius was the father's name, but maybe I'm just completely wrong. I'm going to call him Polonius anyway, because I can't think of it. My wife will correct me.
No, Polonius, he was Hamlet's uncle.
Oh, well, some father, uncle figure. Anyway, whoever it was. So they're walking up to get married, and the priest turns to Claudio and says, do you come to marry this woman? And he says, no. And of course, then the father's kind of like trying to laugh it off. Ha ha ha. Oh, to be married to her. You come to marry them. And so that's just silly little Shakespeare humor. But every time somebody says that, we marry them. Leonardo, thank you. Anyway, so that's, I always thought of that.
I had to check to make sure I was right.
All right, let's move on to our final story of the day, shall we? You want to talk about this one?
Sure. All right, let me pull this one up as well. This is from the Western Journal. And the headline for this reads that a huge group of California churches announces plan to defy Governor Newsom's order. So essentially, California, at least like Maryland, seems to have these phases in mind for reopening. So you've got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and there is no clear deadline for when phase 3 will happen. And to be clear, at least in Maryland, and it seems like in California as well, phase 3 is when people could return to eating in restaurants again and meeting in public gatherings such as church gatherings. So phase 3 is still a target in the distance with no clear deadline. So some churches have gathered together. Actually, this is the California Church United, representing 3,000 churches and 2.5 million congregants statewide. So it's just in California, 2.5 million congregants in these 3,000 churches plan on not waiting until the third phase and reopening by Pentecost, by the end of the month, by May 31st. Now, it did say that California was one of the first states to impose a lockdown, and so they may be a little bit further ahead than we are.
Yeah.
But even still, it's not within the suggested reopening time frame. And so what it wasn't clear on was whether or not there's going to be any kind of attempts at law enforcement to break up these gatherings should they actually happen. And what other legal ramifications could be. We've seen some other legal ramifications for churches who have not complied in the past, such as in Florida and other isolated cases. But this seems to be unique in that there's a large group. I'm not sure what the California United Church is. If that's like, it doesn't seem to me that it's a governing church body, but more so just a conference of churches in California that have agreed to try to open by May 31st. And some even before that. It seems to hint that some may not even be waiting for Pentecost. And so this article is more so just raising this awareness, but it causes us to question the wisdom in that and the, again, we've talked before on this program whether or not that is biblical, a biblical response. Should we, are we obeying God rather than men, or is this in the interest of self and wanting to reopen? So I'll field that to you, Ken.
Well, I guess here's what I don't remember seeing, and I could be wrong on this. I mean, we see the article talking about how they're going to reopen, all right? And leaving aside, I'm just going to put a pin in the obedience to government for a minute. We'll get to that topic, I'm sure, as we have before. Were there specifics as far as what exactly they meant by reopening? In other words, are they talking about just coming together all sitting side by side, or are they talking about expanding into more worship services, limiting the number of people at each one, and so they're maintaining social distancing?
I think it seems to imply at least in-person gatherings.
Right, in person, but you can have and I've said this on the show before, and as much as I have wholeheartedly encouraged churches when this is all going on to close and to meet online and things like that, I also pointed out that some of the restrictions don't make sense. They don't make sense. I mean, people hadn't thought through it. I talked about the lady who was arrested in Pennsylvania or given a $200 fine for driving her car, going out for just a ride to get out of the house, not getting out of her car, windows rolled up, posed no risk to anybody whatsoever. But one of the other ones I mentioned was, the 10-person gathering restriction. And it's not that I have a problem with, yes, we shouldn't be having the large gatherings, but the fact that there are no categories. There's no thought to the fact that when you say a 10-person gathering restriction, that means that, somebody who's got a little house church is under the same restriction as Joel Osteen and his facility in Houston. Our church sanctuary here alone seats over 1,000 people. We could, certainly gather, 30 people in here and have more social distancing and precautions in place for those 30 people than some smaller facilities could have with 10. And so I understand the need to be more specific than that, because you don't just want to say, well, seating capacity, because then you're going to put all 30 people up here on the altar and they're all going to be right next to each other. I get that. And so, but it's a matter of thinking through more specifically. So part of me understands what these churches are going through, in the sense that, I mean, if that's what they're doing, if they're saying, look, we're not completely ignoring the risks, but you're allowing gatherings in other settings, yes, essential settings, grocery stores, things like that frankly pose more of a risk to people than what we would be doing. Again, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt on this, saying that if they're trying to say we're going to be maintaining social distancing, increasing the number of services, things like that, and they're taking precautions and sanitizing everything in between, if that's what they're doing, then I can understand the frustration. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with it, but I can understand the frustration.
Sure.
And I'll tell you another bit of thing that I can understand, especially from Christians here in Maryland. And maybe I'm going to be breaking news that people haven't heard of before, but it's all tentative. I want to make sure people understand it's tentative. This is not written in stone. But the general thought right now that's being put out there in Maryland is that phase 1 is going to begin here soon, here in the month of May. Phase 2, they're looking at September, around Labor Day, of us getting to phase 2, and phase 3 being January 1st. All right. Now, it doesn't take a Christian genius to do the math on this and realize that this whole quarantine stuff happened right before Easter initially, and you're talking about not opening up until a week right after Christmas. You know, is that week really going to make a difference? I mean, I question the wisdom of putting that out there right now, because whether it could be completely unrelated. I'm not trying to jump. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying yes, everybody's out to get the Christians. That's why they're doing it. But you can understand why some people are going to look at that and say, hey.
Yeah.
You know, seriously? I mean, we're going to trash both Easter and Christmas when you're literally at this point talking about a 1 week difference between Christmas and New Year's. So I understand, certainly understand the frustration that a lot of people are feeling. I do think, though, that we keep coming back to that love your neighbor thing, you know, that you've got to, even forgetting the whole aspect of, you know, whether or not this is an instance where we should obey the civil authorities or not, which we've talked about before. The ultimate guiding principle, I think, needs to be, you know, we're supposed to be loving our neighbors. Are the actions you're taking putting more people at risk? I know, that's so.
Well, and it even says in the article that these church leaders, at least the ones that they've spoken to, have conceded that the government officials are doing the best they can to keep the people in California safe. So they're conceding that it's not an underlying, hey, the government's out to get us and to stop us from meeting. It seems to me, at least, well, of course, you have to read everything with a grain of salt, whether you know whoever's bias it is, but seems to me that these leaders have just had enough with it and just want to reopen along with phase one. Again, leaving the obeying civil authorities question aside, I question the wisdom in that. And trust me, I'm working in a church. We're anxious to open. We're anxious to get back to group gatherings, back to those things that really unite us. Communion has been a big thing that people are missing out on, things like that. And so there are things that, you know, yes, online worship provides for us, but there are things that it doesn't provide for us. And I think that sense of in-person unity, there's something to be said there. That being said, I also question the wisdom of these church leaders in choosing to defy civil authorities and reopen. And no word was said whether or not there's going to be any legal ramifications for that. I guess that remains to be seen. But
yeah, and that opens another can of worms that I've talked about before. As far as a lawyer, I'm not. There's two issues here. There's a legal issue. There's a moral issue. You know, morally, scripturally, theologically, we should be loving our neighbors, and that, regardless of the legal issue, that's what should be ultimately guiding us, I think. I'm not entirely convinced that all the restrictions the government's putting on us are legal. To be honest with you, I'm not. And it gets back to what I was saying before, because you know some of them are clearly being applied in such a way that they are too broad. Sure. They're not any government restriction that's restricting constitutional freedoms, which this is. All right. And I think I mentioned on the show before, there's varying standards depending upon what the restriction is and all this kind of stuff, you know, strict scrutiny and all this different standards you're going to meet. But all of them have one thing in common: to varying degrees, you still have to have some kind of connection to whatever it is you're targeting, to whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And at least with some of these restrictions, they seem to be overly broad and going beyond that. So I'm not convinced that they're all necessarily legal, but that still doesn't mean that we shouldn't necessarily be doing them if it comes back to loving our neighbor. But let me ask you this tough question, Ben.
Wait a minute.
oh, sure.
When do we get to that point?
Wait
Wait
a minute.
There's two.
No, not a comment from them. I was reading the article as well, and I think one of you might have misspoke yourself. It sounds like, according to the article, they're already in phase one, and that they're looking to go into phase two sometime. Either it said finally pushing California into phase two of its reopening effort on Friday. So it looks like maybe last Friday. But that churches are not a part of phase two. That there isn't. It makes it sound like there isn't an option of reopening, even if it's until phase three for churches. You were indicating that possibly we here in Maryland might be able to open up to smaller church services. maybe when we hit phase 2,
Well,
we don't
even-
know.
Right.
But it sounds like they're putting religious organizations in church meetings, kind of things, off until phase 3. And the main objection that they seem to have it is they're saying they're more essential than that.
Well, yeah, that was a point I was going to bring
Yeah.
up too. Thank you, Mary Kay, for clarifying that. That is phase 2. I guess going back, did you see anything in the article that said, regardless of, they're going to hold off church gatherings until phase 3, regardless of gathering size? Was that in there? I didn't see it. Either way, I think.
I mean, that's what
It just says that Newsom did not, however, definitively indicate when the phase 3 reintroduction of public dining and in-person church services might come.
Yeah.
And that left local church leaders unwilling to cooperate.
Yeah, and that gets back to my point. So if their phase 2 doesn't allow things like that, maybe these churches are trying to do something like that, and which raises my question. And I don't know. Like you said, and like I've said, we both said, there's always biases in all these things. So I don't know. Maybe some of the information's being left out. But that gets back to the question of when do we say enough is enough? Let's assume that this is a type of situation where even their phase 2 isn't allowing even smaller church gatherings. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not saying it is, but let's assume that in some state that is the case. And they're saying, no, churches, you can't do squat in person until phase 3. Is there a point where we as a church say, no?
Well, I think, and again, this is, please take everything that I'm going to say as I mean it, not as it's going to sound. Not like a conspiracy theory hat on here. But if it were, just hypothetically speaking, to reach the point where, in conjunction with other articles that we've said on this show, where censorship is now seeming like an issue, if churches aren't able to gather in person and they're censoring our capabilities to live stream, then I think, yeah, at that point we have a duty to obey God rather than men. If there's a very clear, and I guess that's where the point of contention would be, what's clear, what's not, clear intent to keep churches from gathering, from worshiping.
Right.
But it said that phase 2 would allow retailers to recommend on-site sales under substantial health and capacity restrictions.
Right.
It's only for retailers.
So I can understand why a church might be saying, well, why can't we reopen under those same restrictions?
Oh,
You
yeah,
know?
absolutely.
She didn't think her mic was on? Okay. She's basically said that their phase 2 appears to be allowing retailers to open under certain restrictions, but only retailers. It doesn't apply to churches. And so the question I raise is, well, I can see why some would be frustrated, wondering why the churches can't open under the same restrictions. So I mean, I agree with you. I guess I do see where we could certainly get to the point where we need to say enough is enough. I don't think we're there yet. Yeah. I'm not familiar enough with the California situation to say for sure what their phases include and whether they're there or not. I'm willing to listen, to somebody who wants to try to justify why they should be taking this action. But I like you, am a little wary of it from the get-go, because I do think that maybe it's not wise. Maybe I'm being influenced by the fact that we are in Maryland and we are further behind. I mean, they've been going through this longer than we have.
Sure.
And so, but I would think that bias would be counteracted by the bias of my, shall we say, lack of faith in the California government to honor Christian principles. But that's just, I mean, that's
Sure.
So I got biases both ways.
That's a very
on
real
this one thing.
factor,
Yeah.
I think.
So.
Anyway.
Yeah,
and the other thing I will say real quick before we wrap up, and maybe this is opening a whole other can of worms, so maybe we'll be on another 20 minutes. But the fact, it's interesting they bring up in here, which I would agree with that, actually, is they're claiming why can't they open under the same restrictions under phase 2? Because how are churches not just as essential or more essential than retailers? How is coming to a pastor for counseling less important than going to get your brand new Gucci bag?
How is praising God in corporate worship less important? And
Absolutely.
That's the thing, that you see that bias in certain governments. We saw it in some of Governor Cuomo in New York's comments. I won't go into that, open up that can of worms earlier. I think we also saw it in some of his comments a little while ago, where this whole idea of belief and worship of God is just, that's just your little, that's like recreation almost is the thought process. And you're right. If we're talking about opening retail establishments, not grocery stores, which has always been open, but opening retail establishments, doesn't that tell you something about our capitalistic culture? That going out and buying stuff is more important than worshiping God, is more essential than worshiping God. That's backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So anyway, anything else?
Nope, I think we'll end it there.
All right, I think Mr. Gast is out in the lobby waiting for us, so we should wrap this thing up. So, Randy, I don't think he's sitting at the desk. He's looking at something. I sincerely doubt he's got his phone open and is watching this program live. A, because I don't think he's all that interested in us and what we think. But B, I'm kidding. B, I did teach Randy how to live stream. We'll leave it at that. So, anyway.
Randy, if you watch this later, I still love you.
All right. Hey, thank you all very much for watching here today. Reminder, we are going to be on every Monday at noon, at least as long as this coronavirus epidemic is going on and we're all dealing with the closures. Obviously, we're always forward thinking. Ben and I have talked before about, what we're going to do with this program down the line. And so there may be some changes coming because we are trying to, anticipate, like we talked about, what's going to be coming up. But for right now, the plan is still Mondays at noon. If you can join us then during your lunch break, if you are working or even if you're not, eat lunch, comment. We'd really appreciate the company. If not, we hope you get something out of it and watch it whenever you can. All right. Did I forget anything? Are we good? We good?
We're good.
We good, Madam Producer? We good? We're good. All right. Thank you very much, Ben. Again,
thank
as
you, Ken.
always. Thank you, Mary Kay. And thank you all for watching. God bless.